Hello, and welcome to a casual faction focus for Ramah Task Force. My name is Chris, aka Beasthunter, and this is the first faction focus I have ever done on this channel. And also, only my fifth video. So I feel like there might be a few things I should probably say in the beginning. First, I am calling this a casual faction focus because, well, I am not a pro player. I haven't won any big tournaments. I haven't actually won any tournaments at all, although I have placed quite well on a couple of local ones. I haven't even taken Ramah Task Force to any tournaments in N5 yet, mostly because I have only managed to go to a single tournament so far. In general, I have never even played a 5-round tournament. I will do it for the first time this year at the German Championship. The reason for all of those things is I am a casual player. I am well beyond 30 years old. I have a wife, a kid, a dog, a full-time job, all of which means I get to play Infinity once a week, tops. Combined with the fact that I spend most of my hobby time painting, and am therefore unwilling to play games on Tabletop Simulator, as well as being prone to switch between factions a lot because, hey, I just painted these new minis. Let's go! All of this is unconducive to turning myself into a pro player. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm trying to get better with every game I play. I am definitely a better player than I was in the beginning, but I simply have neither the time nor the mindset, nor, to be honest, the desire to be a highly competitive player. So, what on earth gives me the authority to do a faction focus on Ramah Task Force here on YouTube? Nothing really. But I have 3 reasons to do it anyway. Reason number 1, no one else has done one for Ramah Task Force in N5 so far. Reason number 2, I love this faction. I have played them a lot, basically the majority of the time in N5 so far, and so I at least have opinions on them. And reason number 3, because I can. I have my own YouTube channel now, so no one can stop me from doing whatever the fuck I want. And my 57 subscribers as of this point agree with me. Well, you might say, be that as it may, why, however, should I listen to you? Good question. I came up with 4 reasons for that as well. Reason number 1, because you might just be curious about Ramah Task Force in N5, and, like I said, no one else has done a faction focus on them so far. Reason number 2, because you simply ran out of Infinity content to listen to while painting your minis. And maybe also reason number 3, you just like listening to my voice? Maybe. Reason number 4, and on a serious note though, because Infinity is more than its competitive scene. And faction breakdowns in particular are, in my opinion, actually not that skill dependent. Infinity is a game of skillful execution, much more than just hard mechanical strength. While, yes, a top player will be able to play this faction better than me, I would propose I know enough about Ramah Task Force to talk about them from a technical perspective and explain its core strengths, weaknesses, and tactics quite competently. Moreover, I, and this is a bit of a rant, personally am of the opinion that not every piece of content in Infinity has to solely look at the game from the hyper-competitive standpoint. I would go so far as to say that the majority of Infinity players isn't playing the game competitively at all. I mean, while Corvus Belli's focus on ITS and the competitive scene is completely understandable, there is a vast space for the game to just be played casually, to not look at units and list construction solely from the perspective of, will this win me a 5-round tournament against Lobo or Rob Cantrell or whoever, but also just from the perspective of, hey, I'm playing a game of Panic Room tomorrow against my good friend Jeff, and he plays O12. What's a good unit for that mission I wouldn't play in another mission? And then you just play that game and that mission with a unit that fits, that makes a lot of sense in this game and maybe not in the tournament. And if you look at the game this way, then suddenly a lot of units that are often maligned as bad or non-competitive become perfectly viable. Most of my games are one-offs, against local players on a friendly game night where there's space for meme lists, experimental lists, or simply, I painted this, so I want to see how it performs on the table, kind of lists. And so this is why this faction focus is called a casual faction focus and why it will focus on this kind of approach. So, with all of that out of the way, let's talk about Ramah Task Force. First, Just a little bit of in-game background. Ramah Task Force is one of the 3 sectorials of Haqqislam, one of the minor powers in Infinity, and what is basically Infinity's version of the future Islamic and Middle Eastern civilizations. Haqqislam is not only the name of the faction, but also of their version of Islam, which is built around a humanist, scholarly version of the religion and was able to leave behind almost all traces of fundamentalism. In addition, they are the best in the human sphere when it comes to biomedical science and terraformation, which means they have the best medicine and the best doctors. They were also incredibly lucky to settle on the only planet in the entire human sphere that has silk, which is kind of the Infinity equivalent to spice from the Dune franchise, only that in this case, it doesn't allow space travel, but the creation of artificial bodies and the resurrection with cubes and all of that stuff. Ramah Task Force is one of those 3 sectorials, is Haqqislam's so-called rapid reaction force, and is described in the fluff as basically the goodest of the good guys, the heroic tip of the spear that protects Haqqislam citizens and merchant outposts across the human sphere, and is entirely made up of volunteers who simply want to serve humanity and Haqqislam, which, as a side note, is why, as a color scheme for my Ramah Task Force, I chose one based on the Sith. And like Sith troopers from Star Wars. I just couldn't help myself. I had to make them evil. Anyway, as such, the army consists of like humble line troopers, veteran soldiers, and generally the best troops Haqqislam has to offer. And on top of that, Ramah Task Force is also where Haqqislam Biosciences put their genetically enhanced super soldiers. Over the years, Haqqislam scientists have come up with various genetic programs that aim to enhance regular humans into soldiers with incredible endurance and strength and speed and whatever Captain America-like qualities you can think of. Units like the Namurr, the Nahab, the Mukhtar, and most of all, the Khawarijs and their most successful specimen, Tarik Mansuri, because they were the first and they're the most famous, and they can all be found exclusively in Ramah Task Force. What this translates to in-game terms is basically 3 different ways you can look at and play this faction. There are your normal guys with guns, being like the heroes simply through training, grit, and perseverance. Units like the Ghulam, like the Zuyodong, like Nafatun, or like even the Tuareg of the desert, they all exemplify this aspect. By the way, Robert Shepard did a wonderful faction breakdown of Ramah in N4 that focused on that aspect of the faction, so if you're interested in how that works, check out his video. It's still quite relevant in N5, I think. I added a link to that in the video description. There are, however, 2 other ways you can also approach the faction. One, as like the most heavily militarized arm of Haqqislam, with units like the Janissaries, the Al-Fasid, and most of all, the biggest tag in the game, the Maghariba Guard. And using these units as the backbone of your force, having this thematic style of heavy, armored, highly professional military guys. Ramah Task Force is the only of the 3 Haqqislam sectorials where you get that vibe, really. And then thirdly, like I already mentioned, there is the Avengers-style superhuman aspect of Ramah Task Force. I'm actually, in this video, going to focus on this last one, because that's the one I have the most experience with. It's also what drew me to the faction in the first place, and the one I just enjoy the most. We will, however, also look at what a list that focuses on the heavy elements of Ramah Task Force could look like at the end, so bear with me if you're interested in that aspect. And finally, you obviously don't have to, and often don't even want to, focus exclusively on one or the other aspects of this, but like mix and match everything, and that's perfectly fine. And one of the joys of this faction as well. You have all these different elements working together, the grunts supporting the super soldiers, the heavy elements holding the line, etc., that make you feel like you're really playing the elite of the Sword of Allah on the table. Now, before we jump into the army builder, I want to make some general statements about Ramah Task Force in this edition, and I feel the most important one of those should be that from my personal experience, Ramah Task Force is not necessarily a beginner-friendly faction for two reasons. One, a lot of the profiles that make Ramah strong, especially the super soldiers, require you to memorize a lot of rules to use them to the maximum of their abilities. Most of these enhanced units who are likely the reason you want to play this faction have a veritable kitchen sink full of skills. And forgetting about even just one of them can actually lose you a game. Just one example. At one point, I brought in a Nahab parachutist right behind my opponent's lieutenant in an angle that he couldn't predict. And in the first firefight, my opponent actually rolled a crit, and I failed both armor saves. However, I only remembered after the game that Nahab are, among all the other things they can do, immune to crits. Which means I would have actually gone into NWI and would have had a second chance to kill his lieutenant, which had a very high likelihood of succeeding and putting him into loss of lieutenant and changing the entire game. That's the first reason. I would steer complete newcomers away from Ramah Task Force. There are other factions in the game like O12 or Pano, or if you are determined to play Haqqislam, Kapukalki, for example, that are a little bit more straightforward and easy to learn than Ramah. The second reason they are not the most beginner-friendly is that for some inexplicable reason, Corvus Belli has taken some of the most important units out of production. Nahab, as of the time I am recording this video, are unavailable right now, as is the Namurr with Spitfire, or the Mukhtar Doctor, or Carmen and Batar, or the Tuareg Hacker. There are just a bunch of minis that you can only get at the second-hand market right now, or you have to proxy them with something else. Also, the Ghulam ARO unit, it's just not out yet. It doesn't have a model yet. I mean, it's by far not as terrible a situation, like, for example, Toha or US Ariadna, but I just want to spare anyone the frustration of starting the faction only to find out that some of your favorite models or units are just really hard to get. Apart from those two caveats, however, I personally find Ramah Task Force in N5 to be an incredibly enjoyable faction. It's much stronger than it was in N4, with more list variety and more viable units than ever, while still posing a considerable amount of constraints on the player. And that's something I like. I have pretty severe underdog syndrome, which pathologically keeps me from playing whatever is considered the strongest right now. Like, go away with your hyper-optimized A-tier faction that can take everything, everywhere, all at once. I want to have to earn my victories. I mean, on the other hand, I am no masochist, which is why I'm also not playing Ariadna. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere when it comes to handicapping yourself. I leave Ariadna to braver souls than me. But Ramah feels like solidly in the middle of the pack. Or in other words, something Robert Shepard would probably call a medium challenge faction. You have all the tools you need to overcome any problem, but you might not have them all in your list at the same time. Or you have them on profiles that fold like a chair after group therapy in the reactive turn. Or you have them on a single model in the faction that you might not want to take for other reasons. Whatever you do, you will have to make some compromises during list building, but not too many to feel frustrated, and that's kind of my sweet spot. For example, the way you fit guns into your Ramah Task Force list limits you in certain ways. Apart from your big multi-heavy machine gun on the Maghariba Guard, you have things like an AP Spitfire on Tarik Mansuri, which lacks range, or an HMG on a Janissary, or Zuyodong, which lacks armor-piercing rounds, or a Red Fury on a Mukhtar, which lacks damage output, or an AP Sniper Rifle on a Zuyodong or a Hordlock, which lack burst. All of this leads to, for example, my favorite choice of weapon being the Mark 12 on the Khawarijs, because it has +1 damage, and the Khawarijs has MSV2, and is linkable, and is fast, and all of that gives you a PS4 burst 4 gun on a model that can super jump 9 inches with their first move, then get into range and shoot through smoke. But even then, like a PS4 weapon without armor piercing will not reliably, for example, kill attack. Maybe the AP Spitfire from Tarik will, but he's even more expensive. And so you will find these kind of compromises all throughout Ramah Task Force. You have amazing shooting with rare skills like marksmanship and MSV2 on decent guns and reliable smoke, but the units that wield these guns, for example, are paper thin should they lose a fight. You are also very much relying on smoke shooting to stack negative modifiers on your opponent in Ramah Task Force. You have actually very few modifiers on your guns. You have BS attack -3 on Tarik Mansuri and the Janissaries. You have marksmanship on the Zuyodong, and you have mimetism on the Hordlock. Outside of that, you don't have any visual modifiers. Apart from maybe something like combat instinct or warhorse, which are defensive modifiers, but not active modifiers. That means you have to shoot through smoke. But luckily, you have pretty reliable smoke with the Ghulam smoke grenade launcher. And you have usually enough choice of MSV2 that you will always be able to at least put one MSV2 piece in any given Ramah list. And you should probably, because there is honestly little else that will really reliably win you gunfights. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Armor 2 problem of Ramah. What I mean by that is that your super soldiers are really good at winning gunfights, knife fights, or info-war fights in the active turn. But they all cap out at Armor 2. And that means that they tend to die really quickly in the reactive turn if you're not careful. Armor 2, even on a model with Immunity Arm or NWI or 2 wounds, can still very quickly result in failing 1 or 2 armor saves, and then all of those skills that you paid a lot of points for are just going down the drain. And that has actually led to the common appraisal of Ramah Task Force as like the epitome of glass cannon, or as others say, the faction that more than anyone else wants to win the lieutenant role and go first. I will, however, try to make the case in this video that this was much more true in N4, and that Ramah actually can buy themselves a first turn quite competently in N5, that there are enough tough and expendable units as well as reliable methods for force reconstitution in the faction that going second doesn't immediately mean you're going to lose the game, as you might think when you are listening to some people on the internet. However, it does mean that you do have to think quite hard about how to deploy and use those valuable drug users. Most of them are not ARO pieces since you cannot afford losing them. And I think this is the key difference to other factions, where your main guns can often also double as your hard AROs, like your tags in Pano or your heavy infantry in Yujing or O12. You have those pieces in Ramah Task Force as well, but they are not your super soldiers. And it's sometimes hard to fit both elements into the same list, which is where I guess that sentiment about Ramah Task Force defense struggles come from. You do have to oftentimes rely on cheaper support pieces or more of a crumple zone of TR bots or Beasthunters. All right, lastly, I want to mention the hacking game. Ramah Task Force is, I would say, a really solid hacking game. Not top of the pack, not bottom of the barrel. I mean, you do enjoy the Haqqislam baseline of Whip 14 on all of your hackers. You have a combat instinct hacker that can turn off stealth. You have linkable pictures. You have even a few nice, if not like terribly powerful upgrade programs on some hacking devices. And all of that means that you have a faction that can definitely play the hacking game, but I would say it doesn't have to, because all of your super soldiers are unhackable. They are all light or medium infantry. I mean, unless you take a hacker loadout, obviously. This is relevant because Ramah is also not cheap. Aside from like your AVA3 flash pulls bots and your baggage bots and a Charcouche pilot, you don't really have anything below 10 points. Cheap irregular orders, yes, there's a Warcore and a Beasthunter. And all of this results in real list building constraints, where you often have to decide between whether to bring enough firepower or play the hacking game. And For me personally, I have therefore come to prefer like a very bare bones hacking setup of maybe just a single Ghulam hacker, so I get to use my Flash Pulse remotes in more than just one way. But apart from that, I often don't bring any hackers at all. I just want to emphasize that you can play the hacking game in Ramah. It's not impossible. You can fit some really decent pieces. It's not that hard to actually just have 2 hackers in there. And we will actually look at a list at the end that has some hacking. I just want to say you have the option with Ramah to just not bring any hacking at all, because also the guided missile play in N5 has been much reduced, and being unhackable is a really premium skill that you get to bring. Now, let's finally go to the army builder and look at some profiles. I know every YouTuber and podcaster has a different way to sort these, so here's my approach. I'm going to look at them from featuring in my list the most to featuring in my list the least. I just want to make it clear from the very beginning that is a subjective take, not an objective one. Units that are further down my list aren't there because they are necessarily worse, but because I personally just have a hard time fitting them into my lists. Like, all of that can range from me just feeling that other units in the faction do the same job better, to me having a personal preference for another unit, or even that I just don't own the model and have therefore no experience with it, because I usually like to put the actual model on the table. I have stopped proxying a lot. It might also just be that they have tools that my playstyle of Ramah doesn't need particularly often. And what all of this adds up to is, again, this is an inherently subjective take. But here's the thing. I think that pretty much every take on anything in Infinity is a subjective take. Infinity is such a complex game with so many variables, so many different local player metas, different table loadouts, and therefore different possible outcomes, that I don't think there is an objective take on anything 90% of the time, especially not when you're playing on a casual level like me. I think what most people forget when they are on the internet and they hear people talk about this unit being an auto-include and that unit being trash is that these conversations are often had in like a hyper-competitive setting. Most differences in power levels I found in Infinity are only ever noticeable at those like very high skill levels, top table at a 5-round tournament. While for the casual player, like probably you and definitely me, even a less optimized profile can win you a game, because most games of Infinity are actually not won or lost on the back of mechanical strength of the faction or unit, but by players making good or bad choices, players making mistakes during deployment or during the game, or just from not knowing their own faction or the opponent's faction well enough. So, please keep this in mind when we go through these profiles. If you disagree with a unit being higher or lower on my list, that's kind of the point. You probably have different mileage with different units than me, you have different personal preferences, and will therefore come out with different opinions. I'm fine with that. I'm not your guru or anything. Any thought you have, let me know in the comments. Chances are I'll probably learn something new, which is always a win in my book. All right, finally. Let's start with my favorite unit, the Khawarijs. In a wild twist of fate, Khawarijs have become my top pick for any Ramah Task Force list I'm writing in N5, which is funny because they were the least played unit of mine in N4. For the longest time, Khawarijs were suffering from the fact that they were just paying a little bit too much for too many skills that didn't gel together quite enough for a unit that only has 1 wound. All of that has changed, however, with N5. And that basically comes down to 2 things they have gained with the new edition. 1, Super Jump has become very powerful, even with the slight nerf to the rule a while ago, which took them from moving 16 inches in one order to 11 inches in one order. That nerf, however, also means Khawarijs are now super jumping 9 inches with their first short skill instead of 8 with the old rules, which in most cases makes up more than enough for the nerf to their second movement. It means you usually only have to spend 1 or 2 orders to get your guy into a position from where they can shoot in good range, usually through smoke. The other thing they have gotten with N5 is Immunity Arm. And while that will not save you in the reactive turn, it does give you the resilience you need in the active turn to finally actually get a return on investment on these guys most of the time and take gunfights you would not have taken previously. Because there is one more thing that has changed with N5, and that is the way AROs have changed. Unless you're fighting against something with total reaction or neurokinetics, you only ever get one burst in return. An immunity arm makes sure that you don't have to care about whether that one burst is double action or explosive or anything else that could cause more than one wound. You only ever take one wound max, which means that unless your opponent is rolling crits, you can only go unconscious. And the fact that you have incredible doctors in Haqqislam means you will be able to revive your Khawarijs even if he loses a firefight most of the time. This, combined with what I said earlier about the lack of visual modifiers in Ramah Task Force, means that, at least for me, the MSV2 Mark 12 SR-1, so it's a PS4 Khawarij with NCO, when shooting through smoke, is one of the best shooters you have in Ramah Task Force, with a gun that can reliably do a lot of damage. Apart from him, other profiles in here that I usually take are most of the time the Doctor, especially if I just run a duo of the Mark 12 and him. In rare cases, I also run the chain of command, mostly if I have Tarik Mansuri in my list, and for some reason I don't want to take a Hordlock, which is the only other source of chain of command in the faction. The Khawarijs chain of command forms a pure link with my other Khawarijs, which helps if you have to take second turn and you're forced to put, I don't know, one of your Khawarijs into ARO. It lets them dodge better. It helps them discover stuff better in case someone runs a Beasthunter or a Yamabushi into your deployment zone or something else with a marker state. And in the active turn, you can just leave him at home with Tarik and the rest of your Khawarijs moving forward. That way he stays safe while still ensuring you against Tarik's potential death. I should also mention that this guy has one of the very few disco ballers in the faction, which I guess isn't bad. I've never needed it so far, but I guess if you want to play the visibility game, it's the best linkable disco baller you get. I also know there are people who are fans of the heavy rocket launcher just because he's so cheap. And I'm sure there are people out there who swear on the AP Spitfire because it does more damage against heavily armored units, but personally, if I want to take an AP Spitfire, I will just spend the points on Tarik Mansuri, who just brings so much more, and he has a visual modifier and 2 orders and all of this stuff that the Khawarijs lacks. Yes, he's more expensive, but still. All right, one last word about their CC skills. They're okay. I honestly never use Khawarijs to actively try and kill something in close combat unless it's like a very opportunistic situation where I have, I don't know, an easy approach to a non-CC expert and I feel like I can bring a second Khawarij into the knife fight to give myself a burst bonus. Because yes, CC 23 is nice, but CC attack -6 and natural born warrior is mainly enough to defend yourself. It's not really reliable in the active turn. You're just rolling 1 dice on a 23 max. And viral CC weapons have also gone down quite a bit in utility in N5, since anything with structure is immune to them. And I just want to use my Khawarijs to shoot more than I want them in close combat. So, to sum it up, from all the various gunfighting platforms you can take in Ramah Task Force, I have come to have the most success with the Khawarijs Mark 12 because yes, you are paying a whopping 38 points for your main gun that only has 1 wound, but that 1 wound model can stack the most modifiers and combines it with the highest amount of mobility in the faction and one of the highest damage guns in the faction. Smoke shooting with a PS4 gun on a unit that can move 11 inches in one short skill is something that allows me to take gunfights, especially against null deployed units, that I simply can't with anything else. Yes, there are more durable platforms. Yes, there is Tarik Mansuri, but taking any of them means either giving up on mobility or putting even more eggs into one basket. Also, Tarik Mansuri, as great as he is, he's also just armor 3. It's the reason why for the next unit, we are actually not talking about Tarik, because at least for me, he's not the second most important unit in Ramah Task Force. Instead, it is Ghulam infantry. I am still of the opinion that Ramah Task Force, more than any other Haqqislam faction, is the Ghulam faction. Yes, Ghulam have slightly decreased in awesomeness in N5 on the back of the template changes to shotguns, where in the past they had the best loadout of any line trooper in the entire game. Now they have a decent loadout. They are, however, still the most versatile, or at least one of the most versatile line troopers in N5. And one thing that hasn't changed in my lists between N4 and N5 is that I often still tend to take a full Ghulam core, sometimes 4, sometimes 5. There are a couple of units, especially in here, that to me are auto-includes. The first one is the Ghulam NCO, because we just talked about how important smoke is, and the Ghulam NCO is your only reliable smoke shooting platform because he gets a special die. The only other source of smoke is Carmen, and Carmen will be at the very end of this list for some reason. That means that usually, or at least I usually only take the Ghulam NCO when it comes to smoke. And if you take him and the Khawarijs NCO, you have 2 NCOs in your list. That's, I don't think, actually a bad thing. This way you can put them in 2 different combat groups if you want to, and you can freely decide in every turn in which unit needs the lieutenant order more. And even if one unit dies, you can still use the NCO because you have a second NCO order. So you put this guy into a 4 or 5 man link, then he even shoots his smoke on 12s instead of 11s, which is nice. And apart from him, the Ghulam that I tend to take the most often is the lieutenant, if I can afford him with +1 command token for 15 points, otherwise just the 11 points with a decoy. Apart from that, the loadouts I am looking for are the hacker. And I have seen lists, usually not my lists, but other lists that use the Ghulam Panzerfaust as a very cheap arrow option next to the Beasthunter. He only costs 3 points more than the Beasthunter, and he's regular, and in turn he loses mimetism. Either him or the Beasthunter, if you put them in a link with 4 other Ghulam, get up to BS12, which is also nice. And I guess you could also take the forward observer. I mean, him and the big guns on these I usually never take because they are not the weapon platforms that I really feel comfortable to spend points or SWC on. But especially the forward observer, I guess, is always good. It's a 12-point forward observer. Then, obviously, we still need to talk about the doctor, because I know many people for whom the doctor is more or less an auto-include as well, because it's a 15-point doctor that rolls 17s. In Haqqislam, that's the standard, but still, it's amazing for those points. I just find surprisingly little reason in many of my lists to bring one, because if I bring the +1 command token lieutenant, I will be able to comfortably buy a speedball, for example. If I add this guy to the link, there are often not a lot of units in there that I actually want to doctor up. And since he's in the link, he's kind of bound to the link. If I have a Zuyodong have regeneration. And yes, rolling a 17 to doctor up an unconscious Zuyodong is much more reliable than rolling a 12 to hope the regeneration roll works. And by God, have I failed a lot of regeneration rolls on my Zuyodong. But you're also not spending an order. And since you can be a little bit order restricted in Ramah Task Force, I usually just hope that my regeneration roll goes through. What I have done, however, is take a Ghulam Doctor maybe in a duo with something else, like a Namurr or something, or have her run solo and attach a Nazmat to her so she can doctor up something else that she can't link with, for example, a Janissary missile launcher. Third on the list in importance for me in Ramah Task Force, Zuyodong. We were already talking about your defensive game in Ramah Task Force and the compromises you have to make in that regard. One of them is how do you spend points on your ARO pieces? You can either spend very few points on a Beasthunter or a total reaction bot, but especially the total reaction bot only justifies its presence really if you also bring a Monstrucker, potentially with an Asmod, to bring them back up. And that total package runs over 30 points. On the other hand, you have your premium, very expensive ARO options like the Janissary missile launcher, for example, which comes with its own compromises and restrictions. And so in the middle between those, I feel that Zuyodong have still maintained their sweet spot for me, because while they suffer, like the rest of Ramah Task Force, from the one wound armor true problem, they are still linking pure with Ghulam. And if you are even just running the most basic Ghulam setup of a lieutenant with a decoy and the NCO, you already have 3 Ghulam. And adding the Zuyodong will already put you at a level 4 fireteam, which means the Zuyodong will be BS 13. With marksmanship means you are on BS 16s most of the time against anything except mimetism, or if someone white noise or albedo shoots you. Usually your ARO pieces for that is either the 27.0.5 SWC AP Sniper or the 1 point cheaper but 1.5 SWC missile launcher. I never really have the problem of running out of SWC in a Ramah Task Force, so the missile launcher is usually not a problem to fit. But the AP Sniper is obviously a gun that you can also use in active, which might be useful, especially if you have first turn. If you have second turn, a lot of the time my Zuyodong doesn't survive, or she is unconscious. But it's kind of like the budget middle of the ground between the missile launcher and the HMG. You are on 3 dice in active with the sniper, with an AP PS5 weapon. That's pretty nice. You can of course also take the HMG itself. I love it. He has won me so many firefights and put down so many things. He is not a super soldier, by the way. Zuyodong are just regular dudes that are veteran fighters and for some reason apparently exceptional shots. But that also means they have Warhorse. They had this before, but now, in addition to Warhorse, they also got Combat Instinct, which in combination with marksmanship is just a host of defensive visual modifiers that just help you shoot well against so many things, which is something not a lot of other units can say for themselves. The non-SWC loadouts, I never even look out because that's not what I'm looking for in these guys. I don't think they're really relevant. I have never played a single Zuyodong that's not either a missile launcher, an AP sniper, or an HMG, and these days the sniper is my most preferred option, mostly because I often don't have the points for the HMG, and I just want a second or third gun in my list that I can use in the active turn as well, and therefore would rather spend 1 point more for the sniper instead of the missile launcher. But I cannot say that the missile launcher hasn't saved my ass a lot of times as well. Critting or just winning a gunfight and all of a sudden those 3 dice on PS6 AP are really wonderful in comparison with just a single hit from a sniper rifle. Next, we are coming back to our super soldiers. Nahabs have received one hell of a glow up in N5, and they fulfill a role in Ramah Task Force that no other unit really fills. Yes, they have become more expensive, they have not gotten cheaper, but they also have become so much more capable. They are, I would even say, a unique type of piece in the entire game that you can find nowhere else with this specific combination of skills. Why is that? Well, to understand Nahabs, we first have to make sense of this giant wall of text that is their equipment and skill section. So let's start with what Nahabs are on a base level. They are a 4/4 moving BS-12, armor 1, not even armor 2, BTS-3 light infantry with NWI that comes in 3 different flavors, each of which either starts up the board or parachutes in from the side. They are CC specialists with martial arts level 3, the only martial arts in your entire faction, mind you, Berserk, a viral CC weapon, and at least at the boarding shotgun loadout, decharges. Every loadout also brings a zapper, and the boarding shotgun is a specialist operative. Alternatively, you can take it as a killer hacker, in which case you swap the boarding shotgun for an SMG and an emitter, or you take the Red Fury, but that's not a specialist. Okay, so it's a paratrooper that's good in CC and decent in close range. Now let's look at the things that got added in N5, which are Bang Bomb +4 to help them dodge against anything but templates. BS Attack -3, which is great because it's a visual modifier they didn't have before to win gunfights. And then they got Immunity Arm, which is amazing for all the same reasons we already mentioned when we discussed Khawarijs. But unlike Khawarijs, they also have Immunity Critical, which is an incredible combination, as we will see in a second. Because the last thing they gained, and which elevates all of this into its own kind of territory, is Decoy 2. And what this combination of skills means is that if you bring a Nahab parachutist in from the side, you put 3 models on the table edge. And this allows you to deploy in line of fire of 1 or even more enemies, preferably right next to a very juicy and important target that is hopefully even inside of 8 inches off the table edge, which is just something you would never do with any kind of other parachutist, except for something else that maybe has 2 wounds. Because what those skills allow you to do is just take those AROs, knowing that each decoy will most likely be only getting shot once, and even if your opponent hits, this one shot, because of Immunity Arm and Immunity Crit, will never do more than 1 wound, unless it's plasma. Stay the hell away from plasma. And now that you have taken their arrows and you are still alive, you just berserk this madman into your target of choice, which, because of all the CC skills we just listed, will very, very, very likely die. If this is your game plan with your Nahab, I suggest the Specialist Operative over the KHD, because decharges on top of the viral CCW ensure that you are not shooting yourself in the foot should your target have structure instead of vitality. Of course, you don't have to suicide your Nahab like that. Depending on the mission or the table or the game state and your opponent, you just might want to play it a little bit more safely. You might want to push some buttons with them. You might want to shoot something, which, because of your immunity and your BS attack -3, is quite doable. But the reason I usually try to play them as these like big game hunters is because that is what their unique skill set pushes me towards, I feel like. This ability to come in where your opponent wouldn't expect you to because they're thinking, oh, I'm securing this table edge with an ARO, and subsequently just berserk their tag or their lieutenant or Atalanta or whatever off the table is incredibly powerful and something that is often just very difficult for you to do otherwise. And yes, these things can potentially one-shot attack. Now, a couple of caveats. First, despite all their defensive kit, they are not immunity enhanced. Be mindful of electromagnetic ammunition, glue, flash pulses, and as mentioned, plasma. All of those can ruin your day. Yes, they received those bang bombs with N5, which helps, but not against mines or other templates. Finally, in order to keep the cost of these monsters somewhat down, they have Frenzy. So as soon as they score their first kill, that BS attack -3 only evens out the fact that you don't get cover modifiers in a face-to-face anymore. And if your opponent brings around a Warhorse model, you don't even get that. The reason they are so high on my list, though, is that they just do something no other unit in Ramah Task Force does. They buy me a way out if I can't shoot something. Nahabs are my only true CC expert in the whole faction, and the fact that they have the skills to capitalize on that makes them extremely powerful in my opinion. They have gotten rid of tags, Khawarijs, hackers, doctors, lieutenants, whatever they needed to in order to give me an out. One more thing. While the Specialist Operative with the decharges has more options when it comes to killing stuff in CC, don't skip on the Killer Hacker because he can be incredibly clutch as well, especially in missions with hacker bonuses where he can press buttons much more reliably, or even just be a decent assault killer hacker. If you want to get rid of a hacker that you cannot get into in CC because they might be too well protected, he can do it. He also has the added benefit of being able to go into a marker state, which the Specialist can't do, but which I would call more situational than essential, because there are not that many times where I can actually afford to do that. So both of these units have merit. You will have noticed that I have not talked about the Red Fury even once so far, and the reason for that is that I never found a reason to play her. She has neither decharges, nor is she a specialist, so if I want to spend SWC and points on a weapon platform, I'm going to invest into something that has A, more firepower, and B, more durability. I have also focused on the parachutist profiles pretty much exclusively so far, which has its own reason. Yes, the infiltration profiles have become a little bit more viable with decoy and all of those other buffs, and so it's not completely impossible to play them now, but I still don't do it a lot of the time. Maybe if there's a mission with a hacker bonus and the objectives are in the middle of the board, or if I have a mission that rewards pressing buttons early in the game, it can be useful to have someone who doesn't have to come in from the sides. Also, this way of playing them that I just described as their parachutist versions obviously diminishes with the amount of knowledge and experience your opponent has playing against them. If they know what a Nahab can do, and if they see 14 troopers deployed on the table, they can probably guess that one might come in and make sure that there are pieces with ammunition that can stop a Nahab in positions that you might want to bring him in. They will also make sure that they don't leave anything important inside of 8 inches, so you cannot just straight berserk into them. And just will find other ways to make it hard for you to do this kind of run. In those cases, you might actually just want to try and switch over to the infiltration loadouts for a couple of games and see how they can catch your opponent off guard. They do provide you with a little bit more mobility in the middle of the board, which is something your parachutist Nahab will have trouble getting to with his 4-4 movement, as well as the possibility of having to actually tank more arrows than just 1 or 2. But still, I mostly like and play the parachutist, and I just have found them as one of the most important pieces in my entire army setup. Also very frequently featuring in my Ramah Task Force lists, Beasthunters. As already mentioned in the beginning, this is one of your very few, if only, cheap and expandable ARO pieces. For just 9 points, you get a BS11 Mimetism Panzerfaust that you can link very easily with Ghulams or Khawarijs and just get a special die and sometimes even +1 on your BS, which is something your opponent has to respect. Yes, many times they will not cost your opponent more than 1 or 2 orders to get rid of, but for 9 points, that's everything you want. They are also great if you're going first to attach them to, for example, a Khawarijs link who moves up the board because they can keep up with them with super jump. And then all of them just do some stuff, shoot some things, and then you leave the Beasthunter in a forward deployed position where it's even more annoying to your opponent because they might just occupy a spot that the other one hadn't accounted for and catch something with their pants down. If you choose the non-linkable 15 points version, it instead turns into a cheap throwaway Alpha Strike piece. With super jump, they are 6-4 move, and their marker state helps them get across the board in order to put a heavy flamethrower over something hiding on a rooftop, for example. I personally don't use them like that a lot in Ramah Task Force, mostly because Haqqislam doesn't get any special loadout for the Beasthunter, compared to, for example, Ariadna or Pano. And with the nerfs to their close combat skills they suffered with the transition to N5, they are not really good enough in CC anymore to kill anything reliably either. Yes, you have a burst 2 heavy pistol versus a flamethrower fork that can work, but it can also just ping off something. I just feel that the vanilla Beasthunter lacks a little bit of teeth. Sometimes, yes, there are games where your Beasthunter puts a flamethrower over 3 units that didn't expect it and they all burn to death, and that's amazing. And then there are other games where they just put the flamethrower down, everyone makes their dodge, someone from further away shoots them in the face and they die. Or they get tied in CC with a better CC unit and then get cut to pieces in the next turn. That's why I prefer to use them defensively, but still, from the very few irregular slots that I am able to afford in my Ramah Task Force lists, Beasthunters regularly occupy one of them. Before we go on with the other Ramah-specific units, I want to quickly go through the roles remotes play in Ramah. While these are the same for every Haqqislam faction, there are a few specific things they do in this faction. Fanus are up first on the list simply because they are so clutch to me many times. Because you get 3 of them. And rare is the list where I don't take 3 of them, simply to fill out my order pool usually. Like I mentioned earlier, you have very few units who do that otherwise, and they also help to mitigate your defensive problem. Because while you might only use them as repeaters in other factions, meaning you want to keep them prone and not expose them to any risk, in Ramah Task Force, I actually find myself deploying them more aggressively as ARO pieces with their flash pulses more often. Especially if I am only bringing a bare bones hacking setup, I am not that reliant on them as my repeater network, and so you can use them as medium range corner guards that possibly stop an attack run of your opponent with their occasional crit, or just by winning a face-to-face roll. Happens more than you think. So don't be afraid to use them like that, just make sure your opponent isn't easily able to outrange them. While we are talking about remotes, let's just mention the She-Hub as well. Most of what can be said about this total reaction bot has already been said, actually. They are your cheapest and scariest regular order ARO to help you build your defense. The only special thing worth mentioning here is that you have very cheap engineering support for them in Ramah Task Force, which is great. And just in case you're not familiar with how total reaction bots work, and I'm not talking about the total reaction skill, but the way you actually use them on the table. So you have these 18 to 23 points total reaction bots. And the reason they're so useful is because they have remote presence. Their entire job is to eat 1 or more orders of your opponent before going unconscious. But because of that second unconscious state from remote presence, you have a very high chance to stay on the board and therefore be repairable. I mean, it obviously means you have to put them in positions where once they go unconscious, they cannot be seen anymore. But then you use your engineer to just bring them back up in your turn, which multiplies their usefulness by like a ton. Because any ARO piece that you can use in the second or even third turn becomes much more powerful. Because with every turn, the attrition game takes orders and units and tools from your opponent, and then they are just much less likely to have the efficient tools to deal with your total reaction bot in subsequent turns. So all of that is to say, if you bring a total reaction bot, always make sure to bring an engineer as well. Or at least a speedball that can bring them back up. Because that is how you maximize the points that you invested into these guys. To round out the roster of remotes in Ramah, I want to briefly touch on the forward observer bots. Unlike most other factions, Haqqislam didn't get back a tactical awareness loadout for their Refweek with N5. For those of you who don't know, I think it was like ITS 15, where every sensor bot got tactical awareness, marksmanship, and ECM Hacker -3 for free. That was the heyday of this humble guy. And I was quite sad when it didn't get implemented into the core rule set afterwards. But at least Corvus Belli brought back tactical awareness. At least one version, for usually 4 points more, that most factions got in N5. Just not Haqqislam. Instead, these guys kept their Red Fury loadout that has always been unique to them, that costs half an SWC and 19 points. Which honestly I am a little bit sad about, especially since it lost Triangulated Fire the same moment that Triangulated Fire finally became a good skill. I personally would much rather have a rifle light shotgun loadout with tactical awareness for 17 points than the Red Fury for 19 points. But that's not what we get. In either case, the Forward Observer bot is still something I like in almost every single faction that I play in N5, because I feel that they are just so good in all of those cases where it's simply useful to have something that has sensor and the activator to deal with the minefield or camo spam, or even if you suspect a hidden deployment, and who's also a fast specialist. It's just a great piece all around, and the fact that the Rafiq in Haqqislam is cheaper than almost every other factions, with just like 13 points, means that if I have the points spare, I really try to fit at least one of these guys into my lists if I can. Lastly, just putting these up here to have them mentioned, the guided missile and the baggage bots. Nothing really special to say here. I don't think Ramah is terribly suited as a guided missile faction, but if you really want to, you can play with these guys, of course. Baggage bots are baggage bots. If you're bringing pictures, try to fit in at least like the 8-point Camille in order to be able to reload them. I don't really think that Ramah is a faction that needs the Evo version terribly often, since you don't really have combat jumpers in the faction, you're not running that much heavy infantry usually, you have tin bots, and a lot of your hackers come with their own firewall actually. I guess if you want to put marksmanship on your total reaction bot or your Rafiq, then bring one of them, but I think that's pretty much the only use case in Ramah Task Force outside of missions, maybe, that give you an extra order if you bring an Evo bot. Alright, Monstruckers. Technically, these would be lower on the list because I don't actually run the total reaction setup terribly often, but they fit here into the discussion of the remotes because there is really little else in Ramah except for your remotes that you actually want to engineer most of the time. For veterans of the game, there's really nothing I can say here that they don't already know about Monstruckers, but if you are new to Infinity, it might just be worth pointing out how good these guys are. The 15-point loadout with the AP rifle armed turret had a brief moment of being in the spotlight until they nerfed turrets to death and now no one runs him anymore. Now you usually just get back to the 12 points loadout, which is amazing because what you get is an engineer who not only brings your total reaction bots back with a pretty decent whip 13, which is already a great way to spend their irregular order. But should you go first, or should you for some other reason don't have anything to engineer, there's always a good use for this irregular order. Because the minimum you can do is throw a drop bear. They have 3 of them, the game has 3 turns, you never really need to reload them. And if you do nothing else all game, but just let them stand where they are and litter the space around them with drop bears, that's already a good use of 12 points. I had games where a single drop bear of this lady kept a unit from being activated the entire game and just protected a flank of mine. Then in addition, they have also a template weapon as well as a gun, which means that they can serve as a reasonable corner guard for defending the terminal approach to your deployment zone as well. And I guess the only downside is that since it's a 4-4 moving unit, you usually don't have them walk up the board. But if you really need to, you also can just bring a Nazmut for that. And especially in missions like highly classified or countermeasures or frontline or any missions that has an engineer bonus or a lot of classifieds, she's just your cheapest option to slap an engineer in your list and have that part of your toolkit covered. Okay. It's finally time to talk about the big boy. Tarik Mansuri, Khawarijs Amir, the behemoth of Ramah Task Force, the GOAT, the terror, the 50+ point alpha bro with armor 3. I mean, this does not encapsulate everything that he is, but it comes pretty close. Attributes of Tarik Mansuri. Like the Khawarijs, he has gotten a glow up in N5. He was, like Khawarijs, mostly a meme in the previous edition. Now, however, he's one of the most terrifying pieces Ramah Task Force can bring. The reason he's a little bit lower on the list and not at the very top is that if you bring Tarik, you have to build a certain list around him. He costs around a 6 of your list, and you need things to support him, which quickly excludes other things that you might want to bring. So, he's not in every list of mine. I like to play him, but he's not an auto-include for me. What does he do? He has very similar stats to Khawarijs, with the big difference being that his silhouette size is S5. He also has 2 wounds, not just 1, which is huge. He has the BS attack -3 skill, which is the visual modifiers Khawarijs don't get. Like them, he is able to super jump 9 inches in his first short skill, and he also has immunity arm, which gives him all of the same advantages Khawarijs have. And then he gets 1 point of armor above Khawarijs. Yay! But, armor 3 is not great protection either. And many the game has there been where I was overconfident that Tarik Mansuri would be able to weather more than 1 ARO and then just fail 2 armor saves in a row. In especially bad cases, he even gets critted and he has to make 3 armor saves and then he just goes all the way off the board because I was stupid. So choose your engagements wisely. Even with all of the firepower this guy has, don't let yourself be tempted to just throw him into the fray. He's not a tag, he's not an heavy infantry, he's a 2-wound guy with armor 3, and you will lose him if you are reckless with him. However, what he does bring is 2 additional orders into your lists. Like I said, Ramah Task Force doesn't have the option of a tactical awareness forward observer bot, and your only other tactical awareness are from tags or the Namurr, which we will talk about shortly. And so while Ramah Task Force will always be able to use a single lieutenant orders thanks to your NCO, it does help to have 2 of them, especially since Tarik synergizes quite well with the Khawarijs NCO because they form a pure duo, and then you can just spend his lieutenant orders on the link itself. The other thing, as mentioned, is BS attack -3 that helps you win gunfights when you cannot reliably shoot through smoke with the Khawarijs, and that, combined with the same mobility as Khawarijs, will allow you to move up the board very quickly, get into range, and use his AP Spitfire. You might notice, however, that his use case is very similar to the Khawarijs NCO, just without having to throw smoke first. His damage output is comparable. It only really starts outpacing the Mark 12 once you get into very high armor stats, which is why he actually competes a lot with the Khawarijs. And so you have to decide if you want to spend those 15 additional points on a unit that basically does the same thing. And then on top of that, if you take Tarik, there are only a few constellations that are efficient enough to allow you to run the rest of your list around him. There's either a very bare bones duo of Tarik and the Mark 12 or Tarik and the Doctor. I mean, this guy will have a target painted on his back. Also, you probably also just want the option to bring him back, but also to drag a specialist around with him. But you can also just pair him with the Mark 12 NCO, which allows you to utilize both the visual modifiers from smoke shooting and the BS attack at -3 from Tarik. Then, however, you don't have a specialist and you don't have force reconstitution. You might, however, also want to go all in and you turn it into a Horus or even a core, where you bring Tarik and the Mark 12 and the Doctor, or if you don't bring the Khawarijs Doctor, someone like Rahman Rouhani, who will not be as fast, but is cheaper. Or like I already mentioned, you can also slap the Beasthunter to the link. Or finally, you go full core. You say, I am here for maximum Khawarijs, and you just put all of your eggs in one giant basket and take Tarik Mansuri, the NCO, the Doctor, the heavy rocket launcher, and then maybe the Beasthunter, or maybe even the chain of command and just have 5 Khawarijs there. Then Tarik is at BS 14 even, and you have spent basically the majority of your points on a link team that has to do everything. And if they can't, or if they're taken apart, your list also will fall apart because you will not have a lot of redundancies around them. 2 more things. Like I mentioned, if you take Tarik, you want chain of command in your list. He is, in my opinion, kind of your only really viable active lieutenant, and so people will try to kill him, which means you need to be prepared for that situation. I mean, sure, if you're comfortable playing in loss of lieutenant or you think you can protect him well enough, then you can leave chain of command at home. But you have 2 options in your factions for chain of command. One of them we already talked about, the Khawarijs. The other one is the Hordlock, which we will talk about in a bit. And the last point is that just like all of your other super soldiers, Tarik is not durable enough to just leave him in the midfield and hope for the best. Your opponent will have the tools to kill him, and immunity arm, as great a skill it is, in the active turn will not protect you against high burst weapons. So, to conclude, Tarik, powerful piece. If you play Ramah, you should play him at least once, but he is by no means an auto-include. Luckily though, he's also by no means a meme anymore. He's maybe the best example for the sentiment of Ramah wants to go first, because if he goes first, he will be a menace. But if your opponent manages to kill him when you go second, you will probably lose your heaviest piece in your entire force. Let's keep talking about super soldiers, and at least according to the fluff, the most successful of all of them, the Namurr. From all of the super soldiers, this is the one that feels like won the most. I mean, just look at their stat line. It's kind of a full-on heavy infantry. Move 6-2, BS 13, PH 12 with +3 dodge, Whip 14, BTS 6, and full 2 wounds, not even just NWI. If you were to look at those stats without knowing the unit, the only thing that would give away that this isn't really a heavy infantry is the ones that I omitted just there, Armor 2. Although, since the release of the Hatamoto for JSA, we have even seen heavy infantry with Armor 2. However, Namurr are medium infantry, which means they're unhackable. They also have the highest immunity of all your super soldiers, immunity enhanced, the best you can get, which means the only thing that can stop an attack run of this lady is glue or flash pulses. Also, since Corvus Belli changed back the climbing plus rules recently, she is just as mobile again as she was in N4. She can fight in CC as well, with CC 21 plus 1 burst in the active turn, and kind of the best CC weapon in the game, an EMW CC weapon. She can also bully pieces with her breaker rifle or Spitfire thanks to her BS attack plus 1 burst and an X-Visor. And she's a specialist on top of all that. However, not only will you have to memorize all that, as I mentioned in the beginning, you are also paying a whopping 42 or 44 points for her. Just for comparison, a Yan Huo, super heavy infantry for Yujing with BS 14, armor 5 and an HRMC costs 47 points. Yes, sure, these two things do very different things, and ultimately I feel that Namurr's price is justified, but you will need to get good at using this piece in order to get your return on investment there. They are linkable, both as part of the Ramah Task Force fireteam and as wildcards, potentially giving them 5 dice on their breaker rifle or even 6 dice on their Spitfire. Which of those two loadouts is the better one? Both. I mean, the fact that the breaker rifle has tactical awareness is an easy sell, especially in a faction that otherwise doesn't really get any of those. But obviously a breaker rifle is only PS7, and N5 especially is an addition in which a lot of units that are Armor 0 or Armor 1 just have casually added BTS 3 or BTS 6 to their profiles, which quickly will make you regret having a main gun that targets BTS. Since you don't mind fighting in close quarters with her though, you can also try to rely on your Burst 3 heavy pistol in a fork with your Burst 2 Emarat. But ultimately it's your choice, whether you value the tactical awareness on the breaker rifle higher than the extra burst and damage on the Spitfire. In both cases, make sure to use this unit to harass your enemy's softer targets. Use her improved mobility to get unexpected angles on units out of cover, or walk into CC with stuff your opponent left in the midfield, but don't try to win gunfights against premium gunfighters or heavily armored units. If you want to throw her against attack, try to do it in CC, because the CC21 Burst 2 EMCCW can brick or even kill attacks surprisingly often. Use her to fulfill the many classifieds she can make, press buttons, just try to get the absolute maximum out of those 40 plus points, because you paid for them. Now, coming back to your heavy hitters, the time has come to talk about Janissaries. These guys were also very much a sometimes food in N4, but they have become, I would say, a little bit less so. Not a lot has changed about them from the old edition to the new, except for one thing. They have gotten the BS attack -3 skill, without having gotten more expensive. And I mean, if you look at the stat lines of these things, a skill like BS attack -3 on a BS 14, physics 14, whip 14, armor 4, BTS 6 unit with 2 wounds is very nice to have. It makes the Janissary HMG especially a very viable weapon platform that does admittedly very similar things as Tarik Mansuri, but just from a further distance and with less mobility, as well as without the armor-piercing rounds. Janissaries, however, still have 2 problems. The first is they don't have cubes, which is hilarious since the Janissary Doctor has the Doctor 2 wound skill instead of the usual Doctor +3 in Haqqislam, which means it's possible to revive your Janissary to full health in one order, but you are gambling it on a whip 14 roll that you cannot reroll with a command token. The other thing is that Janissaries cannot duo, which means that if you want to put a special die on these, you have to invest some serious points into this link. And that limits the number of Janissaries you can bring. I personally feel that most of the time only 2 of these profiles have merit for me. Either the HMG or the missile launcher. The HMG, as mentioned, is a decent active turn gun platform. You pay exactly as much as you would for the Khawarijs Mark 12, and yes, you make some trade-offs. BS attack -3 versus MSV2, 2 wounds versus immunity arm, longer range versus higher mobility. I guess it's up to you which kit you prefer. But you don't even have to choose if you don't want to. It is possible to have them both in your list. You will just crowd out certain other things if you do. The missile launcher, on the other hand, she's your premium ARO piece. If you follow the philosophy that your AROs should cost your opponent as many possible orders and be as scary as possible at the same time, then the Janissary missile launcher does that like no other unit in the faction. Except for maybe the Alpha Seed. He's even more of a niche pick though, and even more expensive. Here you have Armor 4 BS14 with BS attack -3, which can win you a couple face-to-face rolls and is just durable enough that should you lose a couple, you might actually still stay on the board. And even without cubes, you have Rahman Rouhani, who can wildcard into this link and who can bring back this lady on a pretty reliable 18. Still, you need to decide if spending 36 points and 1.5 SWC on a gun that can't really shoot an active is worth it to you. It's literally the price of 2 Thunderbolt TR bots. If you are already putting a Janissary on the board, however, or you want a Hordlock Janissary in your list, there's nothing wrong with adding this lady as your second Janissary to get your special die. Lastly, there is one situation where I would actually bring the Doctor 2 wounds. We will look at that in a moment. And I guess you could also look at the cheapest loadout with the boarding shotgun and a tin bot if you are afraid of your opponent hacking these guys. But 28 pieces just for that bit of utility and a short-range gun that is stuck with an otherwise long-range oriented link, it's something I don't feel is worth the investment most of the time. But your mileage may vary, so it's up to you. Now, since I've already mentioned them a couple of times, let's talk about Hordlock Janissaries. Technically, these are featuring in my lists more often than normal Janissaries, but because you cannot form a link with the Hordlock alone but need a normal Janissary, I figured it made more sense to discuss Janissaries first. However, if I were able to build a link with just these, like a duo of Hordlocks, I'm not sure I ever bring a normal Janissary, to be honest. And that's just because Hordlocks have a skill set that was already good in N4, just most of the time a bit too expensive. But with the AP Sniper dropping 4 points, and the addition of the K1 Marksman Rifle loadout, I am really sad every time I'm not able to fit these into a list. What you have here is this always highly coveted combination of MSV1 and Mimetism -3. And it's on a quite durable platform that has BS13, Armor 3, BTS3, and NWI with shock immunity. On top of that, all of their guns are 1 point more deadly than usual. And that is relevant because it makes one loadout specifically the deadliest loadout against heavy armor in your entire faction. I'm speaking, of course, of the K1 Marksman Rifle. BS attack saving roll -1 means that this weapon hits on a PS6 without cover and PS9 in cover, no matter what armor your opponent has, even a Yodam. There is no other gun in this faction, and there are very few guns in general that can get a Yotam to roll below 10 for their armor saves. This is one of them. If you're not worried about super high armor units, however, the 1 point cheaper AP Sniper Rifle is more deadly against anything below armor 7, you just lose 1 burst. If you don't take any heavy weapons, the only other loadout that I have found time for so far is the Chain of Command, simply because it's the cheapest one you have. It's 4 points cheaper than the Khawarijs, and therefore my preferred alternative when I play Tarik. If I take the Chain of Command, I usually take him solo, since he stays in my deployment zone anyway, and only comes out in the late game to push a button or be a backup MSV piece that punishes something my opponent pushed up the board too far and gives me a late game out. A PS6 AP SMG and a PS6 Pulsar is quite a nice fork. Technically, there's also a Disco Baller loadout here, the only one actually apart from the Khawarijs, but unfortunately it is not on the Chain of Command loadout, which means you have to specifically invest into a guy with an AP SMG only to get a Disco Baller in your list, which I have never been able to justify so far. So, how do you link these? My preferred setup is either the K1 Marksman or AP Sniper in a Horus with either the Janissary HMG or the missile launcher. In both cases, my preferred third piece is Rahman Rouhani, because I want to be able to bring my Janissaries back, especially the missile launcher. And sometimes I even use the Hordlock Sniper as an ARO piece, in which case being able to restore his NWI if he only takes 1 wound is nice. Personally though, I am not a fan of NWI ARO pieces because, like I said, your AROs get better the easier it is to bring them back once they go unconscious. And an NWI piece goes off the board as soon as it takes a second hit. Which is why I prefer to save my Hordlock for the active turn if I can and only use them as ARO pieces later in the game. As for the link with the missile launcher, since she is such a long-range weapon, I usually want to pair her with another long-range weapon in the active turn, like the Janissary HMG or the Hordlock Sniper. Lastly, you can also think about a core link with more than 3 units. If I do that, however, I am usually thinking about the Alpha Seed. To be honest, the Alpha Seed shouldn't be this high up on the list, because it is really a niche pick. But since we're talking about the Janissary link, let's just briefly touch on this guy. Alpha Seeds are Ramah Task Force's super heavy infantry, which means they are an S5, Armor 5, BTS 6, 2 wound heavy infantry with either an HMG or a heavy rocket launcher +1 burst. The reason these guys always have been a niche pick though is that they don't have the most efficient combination of skills for something that wants to be a scary gun platform. There's a lot of fancy tech here, but very little of it helps them shoot better. Which means that most of the time you will allocate your points elsewhere when it comes to your big guns, but the combination of Combat Instinct, Sixth Sense, and Warhorse means that you are cancelling a lot of active turn modifiers that people might bring against you, which makes the Alpha Seed a surprisingly capable ARO piece, even if it caps out at BS 13. But you are immune to smoke shooting, you are immune to isolation, BS attack -3, and surprise attack. Together with their shock mines and mine layer, this is in absolute terms the heaviest ARO piece you can bring outside of a Magariba guard. If you want to give it a special die, you need to bring at least 2 units with a Janissary keyword, however, which immediately makes this link extremely expensive, while also most of the time being quite stationary. Alpha Seeds, Janissaries, and Hordlock are all 4/4 move and are therefore usually not your pieces of choice to move up the board. So why would you ever build this link? Well, there is at least one scenario in which I love this heavy core, and that's Frostbite. Since you need a lot of points in zones of operations in this mission, and heavy infantry is immune to the killer cold of Frostbite, this team can just tank so much and be such a headache for your opponent. I have won games of Frostbite on the back of something like a Janissary HMG, a Hordlock Sniper, an Alpha Seed Heavy Rocket Launcher +1 burst, and in that case actually a Janissary Doctor. Because while Janissaries don't have cubes, Alpha Seeds do. And there's nothing more devastating to your opponent than having put down an Alpha Seed, only to see him being brought back up to 2 full wounds in a single order by your Janissary Doctor. You can even add a Burkot as a 5th member to this team, giving you even more fireteam bonuses because they share the Janissary keyword as well. And it gives you more force reconstitution options because they're engineers, if someone, for example, should hack them or they should get immobilized or something else. Speaking of the heavy rocket launcher, it's my preferred loadout. A burst 3 heavy rocket launcher plus a special die means you're rolling 4 dice on a continuous damage weapon with the template mode. This guy has one-shot tags for me all the way off the board. It's also, honestly, the scarier weapon in ARO. And yeah, it's also the only model I own. I don't have the HMG one. I also never felt the urge to get him, since I've never been able to justify paying more points for a weapon that is less dangerous objectively. Yes, in theory, the grenade launcher and smoke grenade launcher on the HMG would allow you to skip on the NCO Ghulam, even rolling 13s for your smoke. But for me, that doesn't make up for the reduced damage on the HMG compared to the heavy rocket launcher. Because yeah, the HMG is PS5 and the heavy rocket launcher is PS6, but the template mode on the heavy rocket launcher means that you are ignoring cover when it comes to armor rolls, which effectively makes it PS3. Combined with continuous damage, it is just so much more deadly than the HMG. Alright, enough about this guy. Let's move on to the best doctor in your entire sectorial, Rahman Rouhani. For some reason, I have heard a lot of people dismiss Rahman as unnecessary or useless. I've never really understood why. Yes, he costs 6 points more than a Ghulam doctor, but for those 6 points, you get +1 whip and no wound incapacitation. And honestly, a second wound on my doctor is pretty solid in my book. Yes, he's more expensive, but he's also considerably cheaper than, for example, a Muqta or even Khawarijs doctor, not to mention the Janissary doctor. And in Ramah Task Force, he's a wild card, which means I don't take him all the time, since he has trouble keeping up with my faster units, and I'm not always running Janissaries. But whenever I need to free up points in a fire team that already has 2 units with the same keyword, he's my go-to guy. I mean, why else are you playing Haqqislam if not for your amazing doctors? And Rahman is just one of the best. Lastly, I mean, come on, look at his name. Rahman in Ramah Task Force. You're not playing the game right if you don't put him in at least some of your lists. Next up, Nafatun. I have to admit, I've played Ramah for 2 years before adding these guys to my collection. The reason was that in N4, they were just 1 point more expensive from Ghulam, while not really offering a lot of additional utility. But now that Ghulam have lost their template weapons and Nafatun cost exactly the same as your standard Ghulam, they're a really viable alternative to the Ghulam Lieutenant plus decoy setup. Especially if you don't have the points to afford the +1 command token Ghulam Lieutenant, these guys swap in perfectly for them and can defend themselves just a little bit better than a Ghulam these days. Just make sure that you run the light flamethrower version as your decoy, because a skilled player will know that your heavy flamer Nafatun cannot be your lieutenant, and then the jig is up. Lastly, Nafatun are also not too shabby when it comes to doing a turn 3 attack run into an objective room, for example, and just clean it up with their flamethrowers or their grenades. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing for an 11-point unit. Speaking of not perfect but better than nothing, Hunsakuts. This lady was added to Ramah Task Force in N5, and I, for one, am really grateful for it. One thing Ramah struggles with is cheap units and skirmishers. And the only skirmisher they had before this were the Tuareg, and yes, to a degree the Nahab, but no one ever played them as infiltrators either. In any case, both of those are expensive. I mean, I agree with the sentiment that an irregular order on a skirmisher that might not actually see play until turn 3 and will not be able to spend their own irregular order for much of the game is not ideal, but I still welcome the chance to have a 15-point forward observer in my list that can forward deploy, push a button, either in the early or in the late game. And if you run the +1 command token Ghulam, I really have time for this lady. Not in every list, but sometimes. Take the new mission that Corvus Belli released a while ago, Provisioning, that has a forward observer bonus. Bam! All of a sudden, a 15-point Hunsakut that can just press a button in the first turn, bring the box home to your safe zone, is a wonderful piece to add. I don't think there's much more I can add to Hunsakuts. There are people that have found value in it throughout its entire existence, and now that it's in Ramah Task Force, maybe you will find value in it as well. The deployable repeater version for 19 points is also nice if you try to play the hacking game. And the fact that the changes to boarding shotguns have just made this unit even cheaper than it was before result in kind of Moran prices for her. I mean, it's not a Moran, but I'm still personally really happy to have Hunsakuts in my Ramah Task Force roster. While we are talking about skirmishers, Murabit Tuaregs are only below Hunsakuts in my list for two reasons. One, they are still expensive, even though they have gotten cheaper with N5, and they have received a bunch of nice tweaks and upgrades. Most notably, there is a killer hacker profile now that didn't exist before, and both her and the regular hacker got a firewall upgrade on the hacking device. And the more attractive points cost means that it's quite a great profile for hacking-centric missions. Being able to just have a budget hacker that doesn't need to spend points on a full hacking device that you can reveal in the last turn to press a button is a great addition. But here's the second reason why these are so low on my list, and that is that Ramah Task Force has to walk quite a fine line between units that start off the board and irregular and regular orders. I have found that in my lists, probably because I am not as good a player as others, I usually end up with no more than one unit off the board and a maximum of 3 irregular units. And the slot for the unit that starts off the board is most of the time already taken by the Nahab, which means that I simply cannot afford a second unit off the board. Yes, with the addition of Hunsakuts, there is an option to start Tuareg as camouflage markers, not use their hidden deployment, but then you are giving up a lot of utility, which you actually spend a lot of points on. So what I'm saying is Tuaregs are great. I love them. I love their models. I have had great success with them, but you need to decide which unit you want to have off the board, or if you actually want to run 2. Ramah Task Force does not have counterintelligence, and without a lot of extra orders like tactical awareness or extra lieutenant orders outside of Tarik Mansuri, you might run the danger of finding yourself in a spot where either your second combat group has very few orders to do anything, or your first combat group is more limited than you want it to be. Now let's talk a little bit more about some characters. I am sure there will be people who are appalled by the fact that it took me so long to get to Layla Sharif. It's not because I don't realize she's a great unit in N5 and she has gotten some wonderful upgrades. It's just because of what I said in the beginning, that in my personal style I would rather forgo the hacking game altogether than investing into it only a little bit and then have it taken apart by a much more competent hacking faction. And that is the reason Layla Sharif doesn't fit its way into many of my lists, despite her being a really decent hacker. If you want to lean into the hacking game though, she should probably be your first pick. Mostly on the back of her having gotten Combat Instinct with N5, which allows you to hack stealth units that walk through your repeater network, which wouldn't work if she didn't also had gotten Carbonite as an upgrade to her killer hacking device, which allows her to hack in the reactive turn against things that aren't hackers as well. Together with her upgrade Firewall, It makes her a surprisingly durable and capable Infowar unit that can slot into Ghulam links and is just overall a really nice package for 22 points. In the same vein as Layla Sharif, Valeria Gromos. Again, if you want to play the hacking game, she should probably be your second choice, because Valeria is the only pitcher in your faction that luckily can be linked. Yes, she's only BS 11, but you take what you can get, right? Her total control +1 burst upgrade is nice, not very relevant most of the time, kind of a niche program, but overall she's a really good hacker and she has a pitcher. Alright, the time has come to talk about the final super soldier unit in Ramah Task Force. And what a shame it is that they are so far down on the list. Mukhtar Active Response Unit. Man, these guys were almost auto-includes in a lot of Ramah and even vanilla Haqqislam lists in N5 for a lot of people. Mostly on the back that Khawarijs sucked back then, and that outside of them, the Mukhtar Red Fury with MSV2 was your most reliable smoke shooter, or just MSV piece in general. But oh, how the tables have tabled. I'm sure there are people who disagree with me here, but in my opinion, even though Mukhtar have mimetism and NWI, and therefore even better chances to win a gunfight than a Khawarijs, that damn PS7 on the Red Fury just has let me down so many times that I simply have replaced him with the Khawarijs as soon as I could. And then the problem, if you don't take the MSV2 Red Fury, is why am I taking any of the other Mukhtar? Yes, in theory, the Mukhtar hacker is a great piece. NWI, mimetism, BTS3, it's a great little thing. But why would I bring her on her own? Same for the Doctor. Since they also don't share a keyword with Namurr, there goes the chance to have a nice little duo of those two units. And what that means is that I find myself simply not taking Mukhtar terribly often anymore. I'm sure that is personal preference, and I'm sure there are people who have had success with their Mukhtar and still prefer the NWI and the mimetism over the speed of the Khawarijs. And I cannot deny that a second wound is nice. However, Mukhtar still share the same weakness as every other super soldier, which is armor 2, and even NWI a lot of the time will not help you if you have to make more than one armor save, because then you will just very easily fail both of those. In other words, in a lot of cases, it's basically just as good as having one wound and immunity arm. It's a shame. I love the unit. I love the models. I loved running them in N4. But the way list construction forces me into hedging my bets when it comes to including guns, I usually have to limit myself to one semi-expensive, paper-thin super soldier with MSV2 and a gun. And the Khawarijs wins that duel more often. I mean, even in missions like highly classified that might make me think about bringing a durable hacker, there's competition from Layla Sharif, which in a lot of cases is just better on the back of being cheaper. And the other profiles like the Viral Rifle or the Forward Observer haven't even found their way into my lists before N5. I guess one of the reasons they fell off the wayside a little bit is that while every other super soldier in Ramah Task Force has gotten upgrades with N5, these have basically stayed exactly the same. Which isn't to say that they're not good, they just compete with other units, and I cannot bring all the super soldiers all at once at the same time, as much as I wish I could. And so unfortunately they just have to make space in favor of other units too often. The same is true for Yara Haddad, if not even more so. In a way, she's like a budget Khawarijs. She shares the same BS, immunity arm, MSV2, burst, and range band on her gun, but she lacks the mobility of the Khawarijs, the damage output, and NCO. An AP marksman rifle runs into very similar problems as the Red Fury on the Mukhtar. It's only that then she even lacks their survivability as well. And what that looks like is a unit that's, I guess, not bad, and that's certainly cheap for an MSV2 unit, but in my experience struggles to actually find its way into my lists. Rare is the case where I want to bring more than one MSV2 piece. I'd rather bring a broader spread of skills than risk being locked out by an albedo or white noise faction. And so I think of her more as a useful budget gun, maybe in a 150 point game, or a secondary gunfighter in lists that bring some real heavyweights like Maggie. Basically, if you want MSV in your list, but you don't have the points for Khawarijs or Mukhtar anymore, take her. Fun fact, she will actually feature in one of the lists at the end of this video, exactly for that reason. Alright, let's briefly talk about Fiddler. She is good, I would say, in any faction that she's in, but since she's not linkable in Ramah, there's really not much to say about her here. She's okay, take her if you want to. Many people have explained how she works in detail elsewhere, so I don't really feel the need to do it here. I think she's especially useful in missions that require engineers to push buttons in the midfield, since she's fast, but other than that, it's a personal choice, whether you like her playstyle in other lists as well. Personally, I like to stick to faction-specific profiles wherever possible because that's the reason I'm playing that faction. So I only take Fiddler if there's a very specific role I need her to play that none of my other engineers in the faction can. And if there isn't, I'd rather pay those points on something more flavorful. Okay, I know you have been waiting for her, so let's finally talk about her. Maggie, the biggest tag in the game, the hardest hitting gun in your faction, and frankly, the best she's ever been. Mind you, she cost 88 points in N4. Now she's down to 72. And I think that's exactly how much she's supposed to cost. Even if her whole Mind Dispenser play isn't as unique anymore as it once was, both the Gator and the Iguana now have one too, it's still very effective if you know how to leverage it. And look, now she even has a loadout with an EM carbine plus 2 burst. A burst 4 PS6 electromagnetic weapon. Is that good? I don't know. Here's the thing, I don't own a Maggie model. She's not the reason I got into Ramah Task Force, but for other people she definitely is. I have a local player who runs 2 Maggies every chance he gets. So I've only ever played against her, never with her. She is a gorgeous tag though, and one day I'm sure I'm gonna get her just to round out my collection. I guess I'll wait for her eventual resculpt and then decide which model I like better. The only other thing I can say about her gameplay-wise is this. More than any other tag, Maggie is very, very table dependent. Table to open, you won't be able to guts into safety and your opponent will just shoot her until she's dead. Table to dense, you won't be able to maneuver her in order to line up shots. If you encounter that sweet spot of a table though, where she can shoot her Mind Dispenser and then take our targets, she can definitely perform. And at the very least, she is guaranteed to draw attention away from your other pieces, which can allow you to use her as a distraction to further your game plan elsewhere if you play her well. And frankly, that EM carbine in combination with her 360 visor makes her a pretty good DZ defender against deployment zone parachutists, for example. Or in missions like Firefight, where everyone gets to drop their airborne troopers into your back. In conclusion, if you love Maggie, play Maggie. There has never been a better time to play her than now. Can the same be said about the Shakush? Technically, yes, since he is strictly better than he was before, now that he has continuous damage on his HMG, and the AP Spitfire got 2 points cheaper. But does that make him a good tag? Not in my experience, really. Every time I brought the Shakush, I wish I would have spent the points on something else. And with all the upgrades Ramah has gotten with N5 elsewhere, that feels more true than ever. For 20 points less, I get a Janissary HMG that has the same BS, but a visual modifier on top of it. And yes, while I give up on continuous damage and 1 wound, I'm not really losing out on a mobility. 6'2 move on a 40mm base versus 4'4 move on a 25mm base is kinda almost the same. Plus, my Janissary doesn't need a Shakush pilot as backup to dodge on a 14. Unlike Maggie, I do own a Shakush though, and I would love to play him more often, it's just that so far he has always let me down when I did. We are nearing the end of the list. Burkuts. These guys are pretty new to Ramah Task Force. As far as I know, they only got added with N5. And they're okay, I guess. I haven't played them yet. They are a BS-12 NWI heavy infantry with mimetism, which is nice, that are also engineers. I guess combined with their little flavor skill of immunity continuous damage, it leads to units that are good, but that are all northwards of 25 points. I think the problem with these is that even though they have mimetism, they don't have any guns to become long-range gunfighters. There's a Panzerfaust and a light rocket launcher, but that's it. And I would probably personally steer away from them and focus solely on the boarding shotgun plus 1 burst loadout. This little profile actually fills a niche that is a bit empty in Ramah Task Force otherwise. The niche of cheapish close assault. Because while yes, this thing still costs 28 points, a boarding shotgun rolling 4 dice on an NWI model with mimetism that is immune to the heavy flamethrower your opponent has parked in the objective room isn't the worst thing to clean that thing up in your last turn, I guess. They also share the Janissary keyword and are wildcards, which means you can't just slap them to your Janissary link, and even if one Janissary dies, the Burkut and, for example, a Hordlock can still move up as a pure 2-man team. The fact that he's also a specialist probably doesn't hurt, even though I don't really see him engineering stuff terribly often. I guess having someone to unglue or unisolate your heavy infantry stuck in the midfield in a pinch isn't bad though. They have decharges, they also can do a decent number of classifieds. I don't know, overall solid unit as long as you don't fall into the trap of using them as ARO pieces. Again, I don't own the model and I have therefore not been able to put them on the table, which is probably the main reason they are so low on this list. Amazing sculpt though, definitely gonna get this one at some point as well. Speaking of things that are low on the list because I haven't had time to try them out yet, Zayik, Sword of Allah tag support pilots. Almost every faction got these tag support pilots with N5, and I honestly really like the Haqqislam ones, mostly on the back of the Shakush pilot being one of the cheaper ones. 9 points for a regular order that's a Whip 14 specialist with the Gizmo kit is something a lot of other factions would salivate over. And Ramah Task Force is grateful for anything that's under 10 points to round out a list. Especially if you do run Maggie or a Shakush, I would most likely try to find space for these to make the most of the TACCOM rule. I don't think I would say the same about the Magariba pilot, because a paramedic in an edition that buffed doctors and a faction that has the best doctors in the entire game is kind of redundant. Also, the base profile is already a specialist, so you're paying extra for something that doesn't really add anything to the unit. I would say stick to the Shakush pilot and you're good. Now, it is with a heavy heart that I am finally getting to Carmen and Bartard this late in the video. I still can't believe they have fallen so far for me, but I'll tell it like it is. These guys were in every single one of my Ramah lists in N4, and they have not been in any of my Ramah lists in N5. How did that happen? Well, it mainly happened because Corvus Belli decided to not let anyone use their pistols in close combat anymore, which turned Carmen from a terrifying CC monster with burst 2 heavy pistols into a much less reliable burst 1 double action CCW. And then Corvus Belli took away the +3 range ban from smoke grenades, which also severely diminished Carmen's role as a reliable smoke thrower next to my Ghulam and Zuyodong. Then, the changes to Super Jump mean that if I really want to get a unit with CC attack -6 and natural born warrior into CC with something fast, I already have a Khawarijs in my list that moves basically as fast as her. And the final nail in the coffin is that there is a very limited amount of irregular units I can afford in my Ramah Task Force lists, and I have to choose between paying 17 points for Carmen and her sensor doggy, or paying 22 points for a Beasthunter FTO and a Rafik, which give me 2 orders, one of which is regular, the other of which is linkable. And so this second option has won out pretty much in every list of mine so far. It's really a shame, because I love Carmen and Bartar. I'm really proud of my paint job on them. I want to play them again. It's just that whenever I write a list with them, I end up swapping them out for something else in the end. Something that does the same thing as them, but usually somewhat more efficient. Alright, last 3. Wild Bill. I played this guy once in N4 and never in N5. Which I'm almost as sad about as Carmen and Bartar, because I like the idea of this guy. I like his model. I have seen the improved contender used against me with, I would say, decent effect in US Ariadna. But if you play the contender, you need at least a special die from a link to have it be somewhat reliable. And the fact that he only can be stapled to a Janissary link in Ramah while not even counting as a Janissary anymore means you have to really want to play him to fit him into your list. I haven't wanted to play him that badly so far, which is why he hasn't been in any of mine. He's a short-range gunfighter that is forced to be in a link of mostly long-range gunfighters. I think if he counted as a Janissary, I would actually have some time for him, because what you could do then is put him in a link with a Burkut and then break the 2 out of the link and go on a Wild West adventure together while still retaining the fireteam bonus. As it stands though, cool profile, locked out of Ramah Task Force because of bad link options. Second to last, Hakim's Special Medical Assistance Team. I don't own these models either. I don't ever plan to, because I never understood why I would bring one of them. Please teach me why you would. They are parachuting doctors that can bring a parachuting helper bot. Okay, great, a little bit like a Tomcat. I already have another paratrooper in my list though, a Nahab, and I cannot really afford a second one, nor really see why I would replace my Nahab with one of these guys. To have another doctor in the midfield? Thanks, I usually already have one there. To have a specialist that can press buttons in the late game has never been a problem for me because of the fast specialists Ramah Task Force already has. Threaten things with a burst 3 boarding shotgun? It has no visual mods. It only has 1 wound and it moves 4/4. I'd rather pay for a Burkut, to be honest. It won't take him much longer to get where I need him to go than these guys. I'm sure there are people who love Hakims, especially since the concept is really cool and some people will love the minis, but they're just not for me. Let me know how you use them. Maybe I can be convinced to give them a go one day, but so far I haven't been. And that leads us to the last unit in Ramah Task Force we haven't talked about yet, and the one I have to say the least about, the Haytham ARO unit. Haytham, I don't know how you pronounce this guy. To be honest, I forget this thing even exists half the time. I certainly never think of it when building lists, for multiple reasons. The most obvious one is that I don't own a model, because there is no model yet. And even if there were one, or if I were willing to proxy it with a different S7 model, I wouldn't know what to do with him. It has the standard vehicle rules: no cover, super jump 3 inches with jet propulsion on an 8-2 move chassis, and mimetism -6. But where other flyers have at least 2 full wounds, theoretically allowing them to be repaired once they go down, this thing has NWI, which means that unless you're willing to put it into unconscious state once it takes just 1 wound, it will go off the table after taking the second. In addition to that, it gets the unique skill set among vehicles of dodge -3 and forward deployment, which doesn't make any sense to me either. Forward deployment looks useless to me on a unit that is in your opponent's DZ in 2 orders anyway. And dodge -3 is a defensive skill that isn't completely useless if I'm going second. But if I'm going first, I want to attack with a vehicle. And every order spent dodging instead of shooting is probably an order wasted. In addition to all of this, the main weapon they gave the Haytham is a heavy shotgun +1 burst, which is baffling to me, honestly. A unit with no cover and only 1 wound and NWI that relies on its mimetism to win gunfights is now supposed to fight in template range of my enemy? How is that supposed to work out? Do you want me to shoot my heavy shotgun outside of 8 inches? That's suboptimal. Do you want me to come around a corner, be greeted by a template, and then dodge? That's not only a waste of orders, it doesn't even utilize the dodge -3 skill since my opponent is putting down templates. Or do you want me to fight with my secondary weapons, a Flammenspeer or a Thunderbolt with no burst bonuses? I don't know. Whatever the answer is, I don't want to do it. And I especially don't want to pay more than 30 points for that. I'm sorry. If anyone can explain to me how this guy is supposed to work, let me know. I can't figure it out for the life of me. And I would rather wait for Corvus Belli to hopefully come out with a fix for this thing in the future one day. And that wraps up every single unit in Ramah Task Force. Whew. Okay, I feel like I should briefly talk about Ramah Task Force's link options as well. I've mentioned most of their peculiarities throughout the video already, and I think they're pretty straightforward, but I thought since this is a casual faction focus and some people might not be familiar with the link teams here, I'd at least show them and point out 1 or 2 more noteworthy things. First, the very basics. Ramah, like most other sectorials actually, runs the standard 1 core, 1 Haris unlimited duo setup. No extra Haris like Kapukalki for our super soldiers. I'm sorry. Secondly, while you might look at this and think there's not a lot of units with keywords here, it's actually a surprising amount, especially since Ramah is a faction that very regularly likes to run 2 of the same unit anyway, which means you will very rarely run into the problem of having to build clunky fire teams just to get that special die from a level 2 link. In the Ramah Task Force fire team, the first one up here, Ghulam, Nafatun, Zuyodong, and Laila Sharif count as Ghulam. As mentioned earlier, this makes Ramah one of the few factions in N5 that still want to run a pure 4 to 5 man defensive link surprisingly often. Zuyodong especially become even more of a pain once they go up to BS13 and gain 6th sense, since smoke shooting is often one of the few things that help your opponent reliably win gunfights against these. Your Ghulam NCO is also happy about shooting his smoke grenade launcher on 12s instead of 11s, but don't get stuck on the full core. The plethora of keywords here means it's also incredibly easy to create very lean, very efficient little duos of, for example, a Zuyodong HMG and a Ghulam Doctor or Hacker, or just a Ghulam Lieutenant and his decoy to let Valeria roll 2 dice to throw out her pictures. Left out of the big Ramah Task Force link party are the Mukhtar, who are apparently too cool for the rest of the class, which doesn't help their status in N5 unfortunately. Since your wildcard options don't come with any Mukhtar keywords, you're usually forced to take at least 2 of them if you want a special die. If I were able to slap a single Mukhtar onto some Khawarijs or Ghulam, I think they would see the table much more often actually. As it stands, you will often either run them as a self-contained duo or add something like a Namurr or Layla Sharif and turn it into a Haqqislam. Next, the Janissary link, I already talked to death, I feel like. The only thing I would add here is that you shouldn't neglect the fact that you can add a hacker to the link in the form of Layla or Valeria if you want that kind of support for them and are planning to take them into the midfield. Then let's briefly look at the Armored Assault Fire Team, basically your fire team for tags and super heavy infantry. It seems like Corvus Belli decided that every faction needs one of these in N5, and so Ramah got one too, but it's not incredibly special. Sure, if you want to, run 2 Maggies and giggle with childlike glee as your favorite tag gets to roll 5 dice on their HMG, I guess. It's also possible that this duo would probably produce the only burst 4.5 EM carbine in the game, but don't pin me down on that. Is that cool? I guess so. Actually, maybe even a bit less of a meme could be a duo of 2 Rafik, just because they're cheap enough that you could actually fit 2 of them in a list. And lastly, you have the option to pair an engineer with your heavies in Ramah in the form of the Burkut, but is that efficient? You tell me. Haqqislam tags don't have remote presence, so I usually don't waste orders trying to repair them, but a Rafik duoed with the Burkut boarding shotgun, maybe? That sounds like a fun little team. The Rafik uses its sensor to sniff out your opponent's midfield, only for the Burkut to come around the corner and blast them with their burst 4 heavy shotgun, boarding shotgun. I haven't tried it out yet, but sounds fun. As for the wildcards, there's nothing in here I haven't already mentioned or that's incredibly special in other ways, so I'll wrap up the fire team discussion here and finally get to the last part of the video, the sample lists I brought. After all, what's a faction focus without a sample list that makes every viewer go, oh, I would never do it like that. So, rage bait, here we go. As mentioned in the beginning, I wanted to showcase 2 ways to build for Ramah Task Force along their thematic lines. That's why I'm going to show you one list that focuses solely on the super soldier aspect of Ramah, and one list that leads into the heavy militarized vibe you can also get from the sectorial. Let's start with the super soldier one. So, what do we have here? Basically, we have as many super soldiers as we can fit, combined with a whole battalion of Ghulam and some other stuff to support them and try to mitigate the glass cannon problem you get with these guys. I also decided to run a bit of a more robust hacking setup here because I figured not everyone might feel comfortable with almost no hacking in their list. We start with, how could it be otherwise, the Khawarijs Mark 12. He's your main gun in this list, so he gets to be in group 1 with all of the orders. He's in a duo with the Khawarijs Doctor, which means this team gets a special die and doctor support and a specialist, and it's incredibly fast. These guys just zip around the battlefield, take some gunfights, press some buttons, and should then be brought back safely to your deployment zone, or at least close to it, so they are still alive to do the same thing again in your next turn. We then have the Nahab specialist operative with decharges just because he's more well-rounded and I didn't have the points for the KHD anyway. And then there's your big Ghulam link with the Zuyodong missile launcher as your semi-hard ARO piece, Layla Sharif as your premium hacker, Ghulam Lieutenant, Ghulam NCO, and Beasthunter FTO as a secondary ARO piece that can either protect a second flank or lets you stack your AROs to make it even more of a deterrent for your opponent to attack into your Zuyodong. A little baggage bot because we have pitchers in this list and to a lesser extent 2 Panzerfausts, and a flash pulse bot to round out the group. Now, even with your NCOs in this group, be aware that it has only 8 orders left if you go first and your opponent strips 2 orders from you. There's really no way around that in Ramah unless you either bring Tarik Mansuri or you put your parachutist in group 2, but that will limit your second group even more than it does your first. You could of course also bring no parachutist or hidden deployment at all, but we want to play super soldiers, so we're playing a Nahab and pay the price. After all, you make up for it with the incredible speed of your Khawarijs, which in absolute terms saves you 1 or 2 orders on average compared with other factions, simply because you would have to otherwise spend them on moving stuff around that you don't have here. In group 2, we have our second attack piece, the Namurr. With her BS attack +1 burst, I don't feel the pressure to twist my arm in order to give her a special die, so she's just in a level 1 duo with a Ghulam Doctor, just to have some support close by that can recover the giant amount of points you spend on her. Finally, another Ramah Task Force team, this time filling out your Haqqislam slot with the Ghulam Lieutenant Decoy, a Panzerfaust Ghulam for a third Hail Mary ARO, should you need one, but more importantly, to give Valeria a special die on her pitchers. So how does this list want to play? Pretty straightforward, honestly. If you're going second, defend with the Zuyodong, the Beasthunter, the Ghulam Panzerfaust if you're really scared of an attack run, and your flash pulse bots and your hacking network. Protect your Khawarijs, your Namurr, and your Ghulam NCO at all costs. That's your setup to kill stuff. And then use your super soldiers to take out choice targets. The Khawarijs to get rid of mimetism pieces, the Namurr to hunt weaker elements or destroy stuff in CC, and the Nahab to take care of some prime target that hopefully cripples your opponent in one way or another. If you need to hack something, you can. You also have more than enough fast and capable specialists to achieve pretty much any mission objectives. And then just make sure to pull back your super soldiers into positions where they are defended by other pieces. Don't forget to roll regeneration on your Zuyodong, and have fun. Now let's switch things up and look at a completely different Ramah Task Force list, one with no super soldiers at all, and instead full-on heavy armored core. And we're kicking things off straight away with a Janissary HMG and a Khawarijs with a Hordlock K1 marksman rifle and Rahman Rouhani as backup. This team can shoot anything that can be shot. Target has low armor but MSV, shoot it with the Janissary. Target has high armor but few visibility mods, shoot it with the Hordlock. Just be aware of the shorter range on the Hordlock and bring your pieces into position accordingly. Next, our trusty Ghulam link. It looks a bit different here because it's not pulling ARO duty. Instead, we actually managed to find a place for Yara Haddad, as exactly what I described her earlier. A backup gun to put some MSV2 in your list when you can't afford one of the more expensive options. Layla Sharif is here as well, because we definitely need some hacking protection in this list. And then we see the Nafatun Lieutenant as a replacement for the Ghulam, as mentioned, because we can't actually afford the 15-point version this time. Lastly, a Shakush Pilot, because she's cheap. She's a poor man's engineer, which we don't have otherwise here, and because we're definitely running a tag. I mean, I can't show you a list that is supposed to showcase the military might of Haqqislam without putting Maggie in here. So here she is in group 2 with enough orders to shoot some mines and kill some things if there's a chance. And if there isn't, you have a Rafiq, which can do specialist things or do a sensor run or simply move its repeater into a forward position since Valeria isn't in this list. Lastly, there's another little Ramah Task Force duo consisting of the Ghulam Hacker and the Nafatun Lieutenant Decoy, just to have at least a bit of hacking redundancy as well. As you can see, this kind of Ramah Task Force list hits much harder and is much more durable than those super soldiers, but it's trading that durability and firepower for mobility. You will look much more towards having your opponent come to you than having to go after them. So you might not actually want to play this kind of list in a mission like, I don't know, Capture and Protect or Bpong, or God forbid Biotech War. But something like Acquisition, Frontline, or Supremacy, pew pew pew. And now for a surprise. I brought a third list. I initially had planned to only cover the Super Soldier and the Armored Core variants of Ramah Task Force, but I eventually thought I should maybe also show what a grunts being the heroes kind of list could look like in N5. So here is one. Basically, this list stands and falls on the shoulders of your Zuyodong, as it should if you want to play this kind of Ramah Task Force vibe. We have 2 Zuyodong HMGs here, one in each group, as well as the Zuyodong Sniper as a backup and also a late game ARO piece. All of these are as scary as they are fragile, but you're not using them as ARO pieces, because apart from another battalion of Ghulams filling out links left and right, we have the full total reaction setup with 2 TR bots, one of them an HMG, the other the Thunderbolt +1 burst, supported by a Monstrucker with a Nazmod, and an Evo Hacker to potentially put marksmanship on one of them, all of which to defend yourself. It should be enough to buy you a first turn, but if you want to make sure, yes, put the Zuyodong Sniper on ARO and cover another flank with that. We have Layla Sharif and a Hunsakut with deployable repeater as the kind of bare bones defensive/offensive hacking setup that I've talked about in the beginning. And then we have a little fun armored assault duo of 2 Rafiqs. I actually decided to try and fit them into this list, and I was able to. Because what's better than your humble Rafiq? A Rafiq with a special die and maybe even marksmanship, of course. Finally, instead of the Nahab in our hidden deployment slot, we have a Tuareg Mine Layer, whom I added at the very last moment just to give you a little bit of disguise as to which combo marker is your Hunsakut. Now, is this list still as good as it was in N4? No, certainly not, since your Zuyodong kept out at BS16 in Group 1 and BS15 in Group 2 compared to BS18 in N4. And the game has become even deadlier since then, which makes it even scarier for those pieces to just die. But is it a list that will win you a 5-round tournament? Most likely no, either. But it will be all kinds of fun in a casual game. And it will feel really good should you win with it anyway. And honestly, you can. It's not easy necessarily. It will take some skillful deployment and some strategic use of your Zuyodong, but it has one hell of a bite in active and just enough tools to get you through some standard mission. So, give it a go and see how far you'll get with it. And with this, I am finally wrapping up my first and incredibly long faction focus. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you actually listened this far, thank you. Let me know what you thought, what you liked and disliked, what you agreed and disagreed with, if I missed something important or got something wrong. I'm not sure I will ever actually do another one of these, since I don't feel qualified to talk about a lot of other factions, but maybe once I do, I will. Until then, have a great day and enjoy your casual games of Infinity. Bye bye.